Okay. Good evening, commissioners and staff and ladies and gentlemen. This is the October 6th, 2021 study session for Ashland Park and Recreation Commission. I'll call it to order, and we have a single item on the agenda tonight, and it's basically the review of the September 21st council meeting, where the main topic was discussion of APRC funding for, it was supposed to be into the future, but they could only get as far as the second year of the biennium. And so we're gonna talk a little about where we're at, make sure everyone's up to speed, and we can talk about future moves that we possibly might be making, but basically an update tonight from Director Black, and then input from any of the commissioners regarding anything moving forward. And I'll just make a brief announcement. Julian Bell contacted me about a half hour ago, said he was still on duty in the ER till 7 o'clock, so he's probably not going to be able to join us tonight. But with that, I will turn it over to Director Black, and you can bring us up to speed.
Okay. Well, thank you. So like you said, we're going to be talking just about the September 21st meeting and about the funding discussions that were taking place at that meeting. And we won't be talking too much about long-term funding. Just to be clear, there's a distinction here between short-term and long-term funding. The council has agreed to resolve the short-term funding situation for APRC, which is being described as the next fiscal year. Besides the one we're in now, the next fiscal year would together, those would make up the biennium. So there is some movement on that I can update you on. As far as long-term, I want to get out there right away that there's a meeting being requested with APRC commissioners for December 6th for a joint study session with the city council. Now that just came about this week. The request was made by the city council, and so we're putting it out there tonight to see what the commissioners' availability is. Obviously, it's a joint meeting, so we do need to have a quorum. It would be nice if everybody could be there, but if that date doesn't work, let me know now or offline, and I will coordinate with the city. So
that's probably their first study session in December. Is that a Monday night?
Let me look real quick.
December 6th is a Monday, yes.
So it would be their first study session. Commissioner Lant, you had a question?
Yes, I'm wondering about the format. Is it going to be actually a joint study session, or is it going to be a council budget meeting like the last one?
Well, the last one was a joint study session.
Well,
I know that it was.
That's not what the mayor said in her email to me, and I'm just wondering whether this is going to be the same, where it's basically the agenda set by the mayor and the meetings run by the mayor, or if it actually is going to be a joint meeting.
Good question, and I plan to meet with Gary to talk to him about this, but I have not met with him yet since this request came down. Just to give you a little bit of insight to our planning goals, our planning goals would be that we are in a position, APRC is in a position where we can actually put out some long-term funding strategies to the city council in the near future. And I think December 6th would be a good opportunity for that sketch, if you will, to come out for long-term funding for APRC. And so I think it would have to be a joint session, because I would be requesting that we would have the floor for our own agenda item where we can make a presentation and potentially, like I said, sketch out that long-term funding strategy that hasn't been set yet, by the way. But I think it would be a good opportunity to at least get a sketch out there, like I said.
You know, and I would answer your question, Rick, and this is just my opinion. And we're going to participate in it. And I think we're going to be there to give our input and answer questions. And if we have a long-term, if we, you know, and to present, basically to present our ideas for moving forward. I'm not, you know, the council is going to have voted on funding for the second year of the biennium, which is kind of what we're talking about tonight. They will have voted on that, and hopefully that'll be solidified by that time. So I'm sure I would venture to guess, and I'm almost positive that it's going to be a council study session where we're the main topic, and we're going to be there to answer questions. And as Michael Black said, hopefully make some proposals moving forward.
So maybe joint isn't the right word. I'll get some information on that. But I was under the impression that it would have been a joint meeting, but the way you just explained it makes sense to me, and I don't think that is a joint meeting.
Go ahead, Rick.
And that's what I would say is, if it's a joint meeting, it ought to be set up like a joint meeting as historically been set up. If it's going to be another meeting that's like the last one, which was called a joint meeting but wasn't, then it should be called what it is, not made to sound like it's something that it isn't.
Well, and I think the die is somewhat cast, because those meetings, those study sessions, if you look on the council look ahead, have been mapped out for the next couple months, you know, as far as what they're trying to accomplish. And I'll just bet that when the look ahead is published as far out as December 6th, it'll say council study session. So
yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it said joint, but I think we all know that it'll be the way that you've explained it, Commissioner Gardner. I think that's the way it'll be. So. But I think they'll notice it as joint. I don't think it matters.
I think it kind of does matter. I think we ought to either be a joint meeting. We need to have transparency in government. And if they want to have a joint meeting, great. But if it is not going to be a joint meeting, they shouldn't be calling it that.
Okay, so
and I think Michael Black will have an opportunity to talk with Gary about that. And you know, you could probably express that opinion. I think, Michael, I think that's probably the general opinion of the commission is, you know, if it's a joint meeting, then we want joint participation. And if it's not, then don't call it a joint meeting.
yeah, and there is something to the law as well, as far as the commissioners getting together. If you're invited to a meeting to discuss commission business, you're meeting as the commissioners, as a board, and calling your meeting together. Therefore, legally, I think it is a joint meeting. I think it's just a matter of how it's structured and whether you feel like you're actually being treated like it's a joint meeting and having the benefit of being equal at the meeting, as opposed to just reporting to council.
Right, because technically we would have a quorum, so it would have to be something for us. We couldn't just all show up and give information and answer questions with that, because we'd be in violation of the quorum requirements.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that you're showing up as a quorum to discuss commission business, and therefore you are meeting as the commissioners.
Go
So
ahead, Rick.
If it is a joint meeting, it sounds like it's legally going to be a joint meeting, then I would really want to see it be treated like it is a joint meeting that's historically been treated.
Okay, duly.
Okay. Any other
Okay.
comments from other commissioners regarding? Okay. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay.
Oh, wait. Hold on just a second. Leslie?
I was just gonna say that December 6th works fine for me.
Good.
Okay.
And I'll
All right.
just expect to hear if anything, if it doesn't work for you, just let me know. If anybody else.
Okay.
Okay. So I wanted to go over the meeting on 9/21. It was a very important meeting because the idea was that the council was going to get together to talk about the funding situation with APRC and if you will, the funding problem, if you will, to try and resolve that issue. The problem is that the budget states that Parks and Recreation will be funded by a different than normal source in the second year. As far as sources go, it's not always important what the source is, but in this case it is because it's food and beverage. It just happens that food and beverage is a restricted source, and according to the voters, the electors in the city of Ashland, the only groups that can use those funds are Ashland Parks and Recreation and the streets, and as well as wastewater. The ordinance actually lays it out that those are the only groups that can use it. So it does matter in this situation who's using food and beverage because it is a restricted source. Now, with that in mind, the meeting basically went where the city council was talking about, well, should we fund Ashland Parks and Recreation out of food and beverage? And the commissioners have seen the letters going back and forth, or emails going back and forth about, asking, why does Parks and Recreation want food and beverage? Why are they asking for it? Yada, yada, yada. And so Mike Gardner and I were at the meeting. Rick Lant was there as well, but Mike and I spoke, and we both said, basically, look, we are concerned about our funding for next fiscal year. The past context of food and beverage was more about a long-term funding opportunity, not a short-term. In the current context where all we're talking about is next year's funding, it doesn't matter to us whether you fund us through food and beverage or through the general fund like we always have been in the past. And I think that hopefully took the focus off of Ashland Parks and Recreation wants to be funded out of food and beverage, because the context is completely different from when we came out, or the commissioners came out, and I recommended that we go forward and take over, or not take over. That's a really bad choice of words. That we go forward and utilize the food and beverage for our funding in the future, because it's beneficial to us, because then we would have a dedicated funding source. And it's also beneficial to the city because then it frees up general fund resources that they can use for a lot of different purposes, not just the restricted purposes of the food and beverage. So it actually opens the door pretty wide for the city that could be very beneficial for them. For us, it was about having a dedicated funding source. Well, those discussions are kind of out the window. That context is gone. That's no longer the context. The context now is basically how are we going to fund Ashland Parks and Recreation in the next fiscal year? Some counselors were saying, well, we should just fund them through the general fund. Well, it turns out that the way the budget was set up and the planning was done, that if the city council chose to fund APRC through the general fund, they would be leaving that $2 million on the table of that food and beverage funding on the table, because isn't going to be using it in the next fiscal year, and wastewater is not going to be using it in the next fiscal year. So the only other candidate to use it is Parks and Recreation, and if we don't use it, then it doesn't get used. So it's in the city's best financial interest for food and beverage to fund the finance director and the city manager a couple of times. You have to use this money for Parks and Rec, or you can't use this money for anything else. And consider the fact that if they use general fund and not food and beverage, it takes away $2 million from general fund that some other department was probably planning on using. So it creates a bigger hole in the general fund of the city. So the city council talked about it. I think, like I said, saw the light after the finance director and city manager made a couple of pretty strong statements, informing them that it was their recommendation that they go in this direction. Otherwise, the city would be in a very bad financial position. So what the city council, the only option they had that night was to direct the staff to bring back a resolution that made it so. So basically, that made it so that Ashland Parks and Rec would be funded. The majority would be from general fund, and then the rest would be from food and beverage. It would come out to equal around $5.5 million altogether, or $1.89 per thousand, if you will, based on the current year's, right now, the current year's assessed value for the city of Ashland. So that's basically where the meeting came out. The city council directed staff to come back with a resolution to make it so. That gives us our funding for the second year of the biennium. It does not do anything at all, and it makes no promises for our funding beyond this current biennium. The council kept making statements like, we want to make sure Parks is whole and things like that. I just want to be clear, Parks isn't whole right now. Even if they funded Parks the way that the budget has it, it doesn't make Parks whole. Parks was whole when we were receiving $2.09 per thousand, and the central service fees weren't what they are now. With those two things in mind, that we are only getting $1.89, and central service fees have increased $500,000 a year from last biennium to this biennium, we most certainly are not whole. But I think what they were trying to say was, we want to give you what was in the budget. So if you put it in those terms, I think they're going to be able to accomplish what they set out to do. Now that's basically the meeting in a nutshell. Now I did questions about that because I was just going to kind of go into some of the things that were in Gary Millman's memo, just so I can make sure that we touch on everything that was supposed to be discussed at the meeting, and everything that Gary had opined on in his email or his communication to the city council. But that was basically the end of the discussion at the city council.
So just for clarification, I know that you ended up having a meeting with Allison Kahn, the city interim finance director. Is the finance department clear on the 25% currently going to Parks for CIP, and the 73% that we would get in addition to that in this funding scheme, that the 25% isn't included in that? Did you get that?
Okay, so to answer your question, I think the finance department is clear. The budget is not clear on that matter. So I'll have to go into some detail on that, I think. The budget that Ashland Parks and Recreation Commission approved and staff presented to the budget committee was just a typical budget. You know, we have the $1.89 per thousand that went to fund parks and recreation. And then there was also recreation income and rental income and things like that. And those all went into our operations. And all of those revenue sources made up our operations. In the second year, like we were just talking about, there was going to be an adjustment to food and beverage where there was going to be more money coming into operations from food and beverage, and that was 73% of the food and beverage. The 25% that Commissioner Gardner just mentioned is revenue that goes into another bucket. That's the CIP, and in the ordinance that created the food and beverage tax, it states that not less than 25% of the total of food and beverage collected will be given to Ashland Parks and Recreation for the acquisition, planning, development, and repair and rehabilitation of city parks. Now, fortunately, that's very clear. That 25% goes to CIP, and general fund is a different bucket. The unfortunate part is that in the budget somehow, and we don't know that it was an omission or commission, you know, as in somebody accidentally, something's happened or it happened on purpose. We really don't know because the people who did the budget aren't here anymore. But the bottom line is that 25% was taken out of food and beverage or out of CIP for the second year and rolled into our operations, which basically cut our budget $500,000 for the second year. There were some other issues with that as well. I'm not going to go into all the issues, but there were some irregularities in the budget document. And Gary Milliman, the city manager, sent out an email alluding to some irregularities or inconsistencies or numbers being wrong. And I just want to reiterate, like I said in my email, there is nothing wrong with what we've been representing or the budget that we presented to the city council and the budget committee. The budget document has problems with it. The finance director recognized that there were problems and that our CIP was not funded in the second year, which is a huge problem because we have debts that we have to pay out of that fund in the second year. She came to me, let me know about it. There is a resolution to it. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty details of it right now, but we do have a resolution. Once the finance director has that all worked out and on paper, then I'll be able to share that with the commissioners. But luckily, she did catch it. She does have a resolution that will make sure that we do get our 25%, and we still also get the total amount that we need in the operations budget to fund parks and recreation. So,
Okay, we'll take a little break, and Commissioner Lawn had a question or comment.
Well, it's more a comment. I'm not a budget expert or a legal expert, but common sense would say that regardless of what the budget document said, that money, that 25% has to go to the CIP because that's what the voters approve. So it isn't really a question of whether city council, in my opinion, the city council thinks that's a good idea or not a good idea. They simply have to make it so in order to be consistent with the city ordinance.
I think there's might be a problem with that interpretation actually. And I know that that's the intent, is that the 25% go there, but the second part of that it be only used for CIP. Well, actually, let me back up. Commissioner Lant, you're right. I believe the ordinance is very clear that 25% needs to go into our CIP. I think that's very clear. As far as the language of the, actually, I'm just going to say you're correct. I don't think I need to be nitty gritty and get down in the details, but we are used at that 73% for operations with the same language for acquisition, planning, development, repair, rehabilitation of city parks. And that's the part that I was going to bring up, that same language allows us to also use it in operations, but we're
Okay,
so that has been resolved. Luckily, the finance director noticed this. This is something that was buried in the budget document that none of us knew was even an issue. It was not the budget that we presented. It was not the budget that we thought was approved. It doesn't even support these revenues the way that they are in the budget. Don't even support the expenses that we have that are approved in the budget, because the money that we were planning to use to pay our debt wasn't in the right place. So it was just, there's just some problems with the budget. So they're taking care of that. She is going to be presenting more detail. She, being Allison Kahn, is going to be presenting more detail to the council. I think I'm okay telling you what I told you tonight, which is just that it's a fact. The budget is messed up. We need to fix it. We're working with some people who are smart and very willing to work with us and to ensure that everything goes where it's supposed to.
okay.
All right. So I just wanted to go. What's that?
Thanks for that explanation.
Was that everybody get it? I mean,
No, I mean,
something was wrong. We've worked it out. So
okay, great.
So just going into Gary's memo and what was supposed to be talked about at the city council meeting, and I just want to reiterate this was Gary's memo, and I also, I guess, cut him a little bit of slack because he's new, but he does kind of give some opinions in there that I did talk to him about, and he's like, oh, well, I didn't realize that was the case, or things like that. So there were a couple of things in there, like calling Ashland Parks and Recreation the department of the city, and things like that. But if you get down to the points of the memo, the points were that there is a food and beverage tax. It does dictate, the ordinance does dictate how it's spent, and they recommended that we follow through with the budget, which we already talked about, the budget document, and fund APRC through food and beverage. You get down here, number 5. So there was a request by the Board of Commissioners to serve as a limited contract review board, which is still something that we should pursue. The memo that Gary wrote basically lays out the ORS, which states that the governing body can allow another board or commission to serve as the local contract review board. They just have to make a resolution to make that. So, but it didn't give any reason why they shouldn't do it. Besides, he felt like the council should reserve that duty to themselves, and then he recommended that the Parks Commissioners not be allowed to be a contract review board. I think that we should bring this up going forward. I think that the commissioners don't have to review all the contracts. Like, the council could still review it like above a certain level, but the fact that the commissioners can't even approve a change in fees at the swimming pool is not right. I think that that needs to be fixed. And I think at the same time, we should also talk to the city council about the commissioners being the contract review board up to a certain point, like let's say up to $250,000 or something like that, so that you don't have to go. We don't have to go to the Parks Commission to get approval for a contract, and then to the city council. It seems a little more than is necessary. So they did recommend that the council not do that at this time, not allow the commission to do that, but I don't think that that one is done. I think we need to review that one further. The one was central service fees. Now this one's a little contradictory, and I have to explain something really quick, and I'll just make it short. When I say central service fees, I'm talking about all the fees that are dictated to Ashland Parks and Recreation from the city for services provided by the city. When I say dictated, I mean they tell us how much it costs to provide the services and how much we're going to pay for those services. We don't have any say in how the services are provided or how much we pay or who provides those services. They come from the city. Now they're on multiple lines in the budget. One is titled Central Service Fees, okay? So it's easy to just direct your attention to the one that says Central Service Fees, but that's not the only fee that I think falls into central services with that definition. There's another line that says vehicle repair. I believe that's the line item number. Tara could correct me on that, but repair and maintenance or something like that. That is another central service fee that comes to us, or a service that comes to us through the city that we don't really have any control over. We don't get to decide who does our oil changes. The cities, they're going to do them, and this is how much it costs. So with that in mind, you have to add both of those together to get the actual fees that come from the city, that are dictated from the city. Tara, did you want to correct me on that?
The line is actually fleet maintenance.
Fleet maintenance. Okay, so, and this is different from fleet replacement. This is just the maintenance of the fleet. And the city operates a department or division in their public works department that does all of this maintenance. Now, what I said to the city was, I think that we should be able to negotiate for these services. And they said, no, we don't think that you should be able to, because the city should retain those services and not allow APRC to contract some of those services out. But since this letter was written, or this memo was written, I have learned that there has been talk about contracting out things like oil changes and, fleet maintenance type of stuff. And I think there was a miscommunication where it was just anticipated or interpreted that APRC wanted to contract out all services from central services like HR, legal, all those kinds of things, which I would love to have a discussion about. But to say, no, we're not going to do that is actually contradictory. To say, no, we're not going to talk about contracting out is actually contradictory to statements that have been made since this time, where the city has said, well, maybe we should be looking at what the least cost option is for fleet maintenance and things like that. So I think this one needs to be looked into more as well. There's not a lot more to that, but all the departments at the city are frustrated with central services because they basically are told this is how much you're going to pay. And you see, like with us, you see our fees go up $500,000 in 1 year, and you don't see services change at all. It's like, well, that doesn't make any sense. We haven't increased our fleet, significantly or at all. We haven't increased our employees. In fact, our employee number is down, but our fees are going up. It's just really a frustrating thing. I'd like to have more control over that. I think we should still continue to push more control over that.
Did we ever get an explanation from the last administration on the increase in central service fees?
Yeah, we did. And they tried to provide information to us, and they actually did try to do an analysis of what central service fees, what percentage each department, including APRC, uses central service fees. And I think that they probably did a pretty good job of determining the percentages of use. We weren't involved in that though, so I that's why I'm saying I think they probably did a pretty good job, but we weren't involved. I think it would have been better if we were. But that's not necessarily the problem. The problem for me is how much central service fees cost to begin with. And if
Right.
our central services as efficient as they can be, can we do something different? Anyways. So those are the things that were supposed to be talked about, number 5 and 6. They weren't talked about. I think we need to bring those up in the future. And then that was pretty much it. As far as the meeting goes and the memo goes, that's pretty much it.
What about towards the end of Gary's memo, the services provided to the city by APRC under separate contract? There is some discussion about that just get rolled into like our MOU with the city, just get rolled into our funding.
That's what, as far as I know, that is not on the table for the short-term discussion. And I'm well, we're going to make sure it's not on the table, but as far as I know right now, that's not on the table. That's more of a long-term discussion. We'll ensure that that is the case. But I'm totally against that idea that we just start providing services for free to the city with less revenue. So.
Yeah, I mean that's just a funding cut is all it is.
I told Gary in an email to him that if that portion gets cut, we will have to make cuts in our expenses, and we will not be doing boulevards any longer. We just won't have the staff to do them.
Right. Okay. So that's just a future discussion then.
Yes, I'm gonna make sure that it doesn't just sneak its way into the current discussion, but my understanding is that is a future discussion.
Yeah, I mean that's the only reason I bring it up, because these things get laid out there. They don't get discussed on the meeting they should be, but they're still laying out there. They're still, someone's going to point back to the September 21st memo and act like it was, that there was discussion and a determination. So, those are the things that probably need to come up in the December 6th meeting, just to make sure they don't slide through. I think I'll recognize Commissioner Eldridge, and I think Commissioner Juan also had his hand up. Go ahead, Leslie.
Not a comment. I'm just wondering if someone, I'm looking in the document for what you're referring to. I just wanted to see where that was, and I can't find it.
It's a third page from the end. The bottom of the page says 1-1, and the heading is right at the bottom of a page. If you
Okay. Got it. Thanks. That explains why it's a little strange. Okay.
Right.
Well, my comment on some of my comments on this memo to Gary were that there's things that are like in the body of the discussion, it'll say we should look into something. And then right below in the bullet point, it'll say, I recommend we do this. And my question to him was, well, are we looking into it, or are you recommending that we do it? And I think that was one of the things where like, I think we should look into, there's a couple of them like that. And then the recommendation was made. So I'll talk to him more about that. But I agree with Commissioner Lon. I think maybe when we write a memo for the 21st meeting, we should address everything in it so that it doesn't get lost. We don't have the record that exists from his memo that doesn't have anything that counteracts it.
Right. Commissioner Lunt, did you want to add to that discussion?
Well, I'm just, the memo also kind of, sometimes it talks about a parks department, sometimes it talks about a commission. And I think that recommendation to just basically do away with the MOU would make sense if we were a department, but it doesn't make sense as we are a quasi-independent body with elected officials. So I think I don't think it really made any sense to bring it up the way it was brought up. I mean, it could be proposed, but an MOU takes two parties to agree to, and I totally support Director Black that we should never agree to that.
Yeah, I also want to bring up that there is an MOU with the city that exists from 2012, and I can send a copy of this to everybody. But basically, that MOU should still be active, and the MOU actually does lay out that Parks and Recreation does negotiate central services with the city. It's very clear, actually. It says, we'll provide these services for this much money, and both parties actually agree to it. And that, to me, is more involvement than I think than there has been in this past several years. I think that's something that we should maybe bring up with the council if it's beneficial. But the other reason why I brought up the MOU was just to say that it is still in effect, and there are things like how much money we are getting from the city for those services. It's not just under the table; it's written down somewhere. There is an agreement, and both parties signed on the dotted line, and it is still in effect. So.
Right, Commissioner Lunt.
Yeah, so it was simply that part of the MOU we simply overlooked when the budget discussion came up this time with the huge increases in central services, correct? So we just missed that, but so we're stuck with that in this biennium, but we certainly aren't in future.
It's true. It says, the MOU says that nothing can change in that memorandum of understanding without both parties agreeing to it. Now, central service fees did increase. The question would be, did both parties agree to it? And I think the answer would be yes, because it went through for this biennium, it did actually go through a budget process and did get approved. But that's why it's only for this biennium.
Okay. Other questions for Director Black?
Sorry, there's not a clear way through this memo.
Yeah.
So I tried to write a memo that put the point out there that I thought were pertinent. There's obviously more in that memo, but like I said, there's no clear path through it. So.
Well, I think once again, and not to beat a dead horse, but the council didn't get to the majority of Gary's memo. It was never discussed in public. they ran out of time. They couldn't even agree on the funding moving forward until staff stepped in and clarified the restricted funds from food and beverage and the path forward there. But this is an important memo because of the points that the interim city manager brought up. Like I said earlier, we can't allow them to just lie there and someone refer back to it as a recommendation from staff that was never discussed and then all of a sudden becomes part of an agreement moving forward. It's just important that we address all those points, including the funding for next year. I mean, they're going to come up with a recommendation. I think it's going to be at their next regular business meeting that's going to specify how the funding for APRC is going to happen in the final year of this current biennium. And, we need to make sure that exceptions on, where the funding's coming from or what the level of funding is. And, which is, once again, that's kind of the essence of this meeting. It's not any new information, but I want to make sure that, that all the commissioners are up to speed on really what we're up against. And then, really just kind of laid some basic foundation for preparations for a December meeting that I wasn't aware of until today, but I knew that watching the council meetings that, they're methodically going through, this funding, but they know that long-term funding for APRC has to be resolved, and it has to be resolved soon, because as you read through this memo, you see some of the options are going to the voters for different, things, and there's timelines that come up for getting items on ballots and whatnot. So, I mean, we really truly need to be an integral part of any discussion that happens in December, because that will really, they should be determining the path forward at that time, and we need to be there, and we need to have, we need to have a full quiver, so to speak, and be ready to, to not only make recommendations, but to, ensure that things don't slip by, or that, not sleight of hand, but I mean, just even where the 25% and the 73% all of a sudden becomes a different number than it should be, and those kind of things. So I will stop there though, and see if there's any other points that other commissioners would like to bring up, discuss, if there's any further questions, or if Director Black wants to share any other items. Commissioner Lewis, go ahead.
Somebody mentioned that there'll be decisions made before this December 6th meeting. And I guess I see that as maybe more important than the December 6th meeting. If there's already decisions made and the gavel's been slammed, it seems like it won't help us in our discussions on December 6th. So I'm just kind of curious what decisions will be made at the next council meeting that we should be concerned about.
Well, the next council meeting is the recommendation from staff for the funding for the second year of this biennium, which they intended to do not yesterday, but 2 weeks ago, and they couldn't get through. When in September 21st, they were hoping to determine how the funding was going to look for APRC in the second year of the biennium, but they were unable to do that. And so that meeting was left hanging with staff to come back with a recommendation that they had discussed at the time, which would be, as Director Black pointed out, the 98% of food and beverage split between the current CIP money, 25% that we get, 73% that would be additional, and then the difference between our appropriated budget comes from the general fund, which helps the city because we take less from the general fund, but we take all of the food and we are appropriated all the food and beverage money.
And I guess that's the short-term funding part, but I guess it's the other bullet points of the contractual that was a recommendation from the city manager, or his opinion on it. And also, yeah, what else was there was, and there's some talk in the memo and discussion on the long-term part of recreation being kind of at risk. There was a little bit of verbiage about that too. And so I'm thinking, the short term and then the bullet points seem to never been discussed. And so I guess is that a position we could take on December 6th is working on the other bullet points. It seemed pretty important to hammer those out. And so, yeah.
Right, and that is the distinction. I guess I just want everyone to be aware of what's going to happen at the next council meeting, and it's reflected from this memo that we've been going through, but they didn't get all the way through everything that Milliman had brought up. So December 6th now is the date where we will meet with council and try to hammer out the future of APRC. And those items that we brought up in the past, like at the last joint meeting that never got discussed, are definitely on the table, to be incorporated in whatever moves forward. And we don't really know what the city council really has in mind for the 6th. I mean, you might speak to this, Michael. I'm not sure how we determine where they're going to come from.
Yeah, and I think it's probably more important that we know where we're coming from. And those things that you brought up, Commissioner Lewis, are some of the things that I want to address in the December 6th meeting. I like to put a sketch out there where we can show how we think the future of APRC should look as far as funding goes, so that decisions like what recreation programs, it's more of a decision of what recreation programs to provide that the commissioners decide, because funding is in place and we don't have to talk about paring back recreation. So that's the goal that I would have for the meeting, is to be out in front of these things, as opposed to trying to justify why we shouldn't cut. Get out in front of them and provide a solution so that we don't have to cut recreation down. And that's where I'd like to come from. So that's my goal in the next 2 months, is to get to that point. For a sketch. So,
getting back.
Sorry.
Oh, no. Getting back to Commissioner Law's point of what this meeting is going to be, it's not just semantics. It's really important, I think. And you made a excellent point that if it's a joint study session, then we're not necessarily at the mercy of the mayor like last time, where the agenda wasn't discussed in the time frame we had. And so I see it to be really important that we have some kind of part in the agenda and how it's followed. So, I know that's always difficult to get through everything, but sometimes it gets focused on one thing and there's a lot of discussion on it and it should be moved ahead. But when we're just there to observe or make an occasional comment. It seems like it's not in our advantage to get these things discussed and hear what the rest of the council feels about it. So yeah, it seems like hammering that out. We got some time to discuss with whoever the powers that be, discuss those kinds of things, whether it's the mayor or the city manager, or how this thing's formatted. Yeah.
Okay. Commissioner Lunt, had your hand up?
Yeah, something was said that I just wanted to clarify because it's true, but yet it isn't quite the whole picture. And that has to do with the fact that if we take food and beverage money instead of general fund money, that it helps the city. And it does because it puts more money available in the general fund, but we just need to recognize that there's less money for CIP and et cetera, or from the enterprise funds. So it isn't like we're creating money out of nothing. There's still, if we take that food and beverage, which I think is a good idea, for streets and for sewer. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, or the city council shouldn't approve it. I think they should, but I think we ought to do it with eyes open and also have that knowledge. So when we're talking to the citizens, everybody knows what that we know, that we're not just think that, this is a solution that creates money out of nothing.
Well, I didn't have anything else for you tonight, and I think we only noticed talking about this one item. I think the next study session coming up should be preparation for the December 6th meeting and talk about some things that we need to get in, I guess, nailed down before we go to the December 6th meeting with the city council. So that would be the November 3rd.
Yeah, and I guess that would be our last study session before their meeting, because our next study session would be the day after that.
Well, is it? If December 1st is a Wednesday.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. We'll have to look at the people.
Yeah, no, but I you're right though. I mean, we should be well on our way to mapping our strategy forward by November 3rd.
Yes.
Commissioner Lunt?
And just to be clear, when we talk about mapping our strategy, are we talking about what we are going to be proposing as a potential long-term funding?
Yeah, I think we'll be talking about several items, but there's going to be a package presented to the city council. I think everything that we present to the city council as a package at December 6th should be brief. We should have it at our next study session.
But we're not prepared to talk about that tonight. Is that what you're saying?
We are not prepared to talk about it tonight. And I don't think we noticed for it tonight either. I think we noticed this just to talk about the September 21st.
Right. So yeah. So once the city council slams the gavel on funding for next year, obviously our main focus is going to be the long-term funding item, and their focus needs to be the same thing. It's like you can't go into 2022 with no strategy for funding, because as you can see through Gary Millman's memo, there's dates for anything that council may want to take to citizens You know, there may be things that we want to take to citizens. You know, there's going to be timeframes that need to be met, and that strategy for funding after June 30th, 2023 needs to be in place next year. You know, we need to know what's going to be happening as best we can, as early as we can. So, Commissioner Eldridge, go ahead.
I just wanted to personally thank Director Black and Commissioner Gardner for all the work and all the time that you've been spending on this issue. And I'm very aware of how much effort and how many hours and how many meetings it's been for both of you. And I really wanted to extend my appreciation in that regard. And, you know, this is such an important issue, and I'm so glad that both of you had the ability to put so much effort into it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Commissioner Long and a lot of legwork too. So
thank you, Commissioner Lund.
Any other items from commissioners? We do have that on our list. If anyone wants to pass on any information, as you might have heard earlier, we're going to try to fire up the trails review with regards to the mountain bike RV MBA's proposal. You know what we do need to do, and I'll just throw it out there. So Commissioner Lewis and I were the two members from the commission that worked diligently for well over 2 years to update the current open space or the trails master plan. And but Commissioner Lant has also been heavily involved in the past and currently with the mountain bike community. Commissioner Eldridge is definitely going to be on that committee. So one of the three of us needs to work along with Leslie when that committee comes to fruition. So you know, I'm willing to step aside and allow either Commissioner Lewis or Want to move forward with that. And I'm just wondering if you guys want to make some kind of an agreement on where we're going with that. If not, we'll go to Chambers and duke it out or something. I don't know. we'll retire to Chambers and so anyways, we'll Commissioner Lewis.
Yeah, I'd be willing to relinquish my position. Yeah, no problem. I mean, two people who have a lot of interest in bicycling and know the trails probably better than I do would probably be more helpful in that endeavor. So
so when that list goes out, then we'll have Commissioner Lant and Commissioner Eldridge as representatives from APRC moving forward on that. Okay. Go ahead, Rick.
Oh, I just want to thank you for so graciously relinquishing that opportunity.
All right. It's a love fest.
good luck with all that. That's what
Yeah.
I'll leave that with you.
You guys
And hopefully
better do
luck's
it
not
right,
involved.
okay? Do it right, and then make us proud. No,
Yeah.
anything else from commissioners? Okay, well, like I said, unfortunately, Julian couldn't join us tonight, but we'll keep him updated, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone next Wednesday night for our regular meeting. So thank you very much for attending. We'll see you next week.
Good night.
Good night.